All right. Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about a few things. Primarily, we're going to be talking about the Olympics, what happened at the Olympics. Let me make sure I get this right. Okay. We're going to be talking about what happened at the Olympics. And it's not just the Last Supper debacle that happened. So we're going to be going over a few things, and we want to talk about more in-depth angles that haven't been done. And that's primarily because this has kind of been beaten like a dead horse, right? Like in a lot of different angles. And so we're going to try and bring an angle that hasn't been talked about because everyone else has heard everything else. So I've got my friend Crusader Jerome with me. He's a friend of mine. He's part of the Exodus 90 group. And it is a coincidence that we have the color scheme for Exodus 90 on there.
Very nice.
There's this orange and white as well. Yeah, so he's on here, and we're going to be talking about the Olympics and the paganism and the Enlightenment. So
yeah.
So I guess just to kind of like set the stage, like what did you think of when you heard of the Last Supper debacle? What was the thing that really kind of threw you off after watching it?
I didn't actually watch it. I only heard about it after the fact on Twitter, and I was like, okay, that's terrible, and I'm not going to watch it.
Okay. Well, no, that's fair. Because there's plenty of images all over the place that have the comparison between what the Last Supper should look like and then what they presented it.
Right. It's like I've seen the screenshot and all that.
And so, and you know, you have to be careful because depending on the screenshot, it's not appropriate for kids. Like, I mean, the whole thing is not appropriate for kids, but the fact that like a 9-year-old was in the vicinity of what was going on was also kind of it kind of threw me for a loop because I wasn't expecting, like, if you're gonna make a statement like that, don't have kids there. But I mean, that's so it's very sad and unfortunate, and it should have been a family time, but it turned into something very perverse. So I guess let's see which angle to start off with, because there's a few of them. So when it comes to the presentation, you had a lot of Catholics initially, like, I don't know which social media you've been on, or even if you've talked about this with many of your friends outside of our group, but I saw a lot of like Catholics gaslighting other Catholics about this. Like they were taking it from the angle like, oh, well, that was from a pagan depiction. And and so like there's a few pieces of artwork that were cited, and then when you look at the artwork and then look at what the image was, it was not the same whatsoever. And so
it's like I have at least some minor contact with like some Jews and Muslims on the internet through one of my other group chats, and it's like they're like, yeah, what the crap is this? No gaslighting there at all.
Well, I thought that was weird that those groups were very responsive in the same in a supportive way. Like, hey, go out and like say something about this. This is like bad. Like, and not just, I'm not talking about just the what is it? What is it? Andrew Tate? Well, no, not Abraham. Andrew Tate, the dude. Because I don't think we should point to him as a good role model for many things, if anything at all, but what not to do. But there are several other people of the other Abrahamic faiths coming out and saying, hey, like, you need to say something. And there were several bishops that have come out and said something, but not everybody, right? Like, so so it was kind of weird to talk to, like, there's a particular friend of mine that was speaking about it in such a way where it was like, we should give the benefit of the doubt in regards to this, like, to the point where it's like, it was quite literally the benefit of the doubt to a fault, because it was like, people, and my wife pointed this out wonderfully, that right now it seems that a lot of Catholics, and expanding past that, Christians, they'll do anything to not be offended. Like
Right.
they'll do anything to not be offended, because if they are offended, that means that they're like they have to do something, that they have to act on that of like being offended. And blasphemy is one of those things where it's one of the greatest sins one can do.
Right.
And especially on a public forum that is the Olympics, which is supposed to cultivate unity and prevent wars, like it's actually supposed to bring about camaraderie across the different countries. To then put that in is poisoning the well in like the worst possible way. And so like the fact that there haven't been certain, like I appreciate the fact that there have been bishops that have come out. Right. But like there are some ways that we can, as Catholics and as an institution, can come out stronger. And I think
definitely
that should definitely be done. But I don't want to just sit on that, because that's already been talked about. That's more of like priming, priming for what we're talking about. But I guess when it comes to the Enlightenment, what do you think in like the connection between this and the Enlightenment? Like the fact that this comes from the very same country that started the French Revolution and did start the Enlightenment. What do you think about that?
Well, so the anti-clericalism in France that kind of predated and led into the Enlightenment really goes back to like the effects of the Protestant Reformation in France. So like this is kind of like way back in the background, maybe a little more than is relevant, but just so we have that. So in 1500s France, the main division between Protestants and Catholics was essentially the king is Catholic and the people are Catholic, but a certain group of nobles decided to become Protestant, Calvinist Protestant, almost as a political statement, because having that religious division is like a separation from the king and from the authority of the king. And so through the civil wars in France, that's a major thing. And while Henry IV, after he won the Succession War, eventually did convert to Catholicism outwardly, because the people of Paris refused to accept him if he didn't. So, but in like from then on, it's like the monarchy and the nobility was largely Catholic, but Louis XIV, the Sun King, so when he was kind of like at the tail end of the Reformation / Protestant Revolt era. And so he enacted some reforms to sort of encourage the Protestants to stop being Protestant. But about halfway through the process of Protestantism going away, he decided, well, let's just make Protestantism illegal and do some persecution. And the people who were Protestant at the time sort of came back into hating the king and hating the church. And so that wasn't just those, yes, Paris is worth the mass, Henry IV. Yeah. So, but the people who eventually like found it, who eventually started on the Enlightenment, anti-clericalism, anti-king track, were a lot of like the bourgeois educated class, and then some of the nobles who had like become Protestant for political or economic reasons, and then became more staunchly anti-clerical once Protestantism was officially cracked down on.
And so like so you have Louis XIV doing that, and then Louis XVI, that's his grandson, right?
Great grandson.
So he's the one where they end up killing him and Marie Antoinette.
Right.
and
And
the
so,
rest of the clerics that are there. And like,
yeah, a lot of priests, a lot of nuns just dead. But so another thing to notice is that in Louis XIV's reign, like he said, "I am the state," and one of the major parts of his rule was expanding his personal power by expanding the bureaucracy that directly reported to him.
mm,
But the bureaucracy has to be filled with educated, capable people, and this intelligentsia who were not answerable to anyone else but the king and started to have a lot of power. A lot of them came from this anti-clerical background. And so, and well, yeah, a lot of them came from this Enlightenment background. And then
so
that directly led into when the Three Estates was called just before the revolution. You have the church, the nobility, and the rest of the people. And so, but the third estate for the common people is like their representatives were these highly educated bureaucrats who already had, like, to some extent, like a fair amount of power in the government. But because the king was on top and they, for whatever reason, I haven't studied enough of it to know what the full extent of like their motives at the time, but they
right.
decided, well, we're just going to abolish the king and we're going to depose the king and declare that we're a republic now. And because they
Do you
had
mind?
that bureaucracy going on.
So like, just to interject here. So like, in modern day speak, how we would see that play out is almost like me and you have experience in the corporate world, right? Like we deal with HR. Our day jobs are not coming in front of a camera and talking.
Mm-hmm.
We do daily, day jobs. What do you do? Just to
Software
however,
engineering.
software engineer, right? And I'm a statistician, and
Mm-hmm.
so we deal with the corporate realm. And so imagine all of a sudden your HR starts promoting certain policies, and through that promotion of policy, forces the institution to change. And so whether or not the CEO wants it, but because it's politically supported, there's backing behind it. I mean, we know this because, for example, we can't say certain pronouns, right? Like we'll get in trouble if we say things a certain way, and we'll get fired like almost on the spot. That is a modern day example of what he's describing in France, of what happened under King Louis XIV. It just takes different forms, and because we live under a democracy republic or democratic republic, and that's a monarchy, arguably we live under corporatism, right? Like that's really what we have right now. We don't have a democracy or a republic, we have corporatism. But the influence is going to look different just slightly, but by its nature be the same.
Well, right. And there is a slight, you can make the distinction that the French Revolution was initially a change in like a sudden change in politics that reflected a trend in like the day-to-day effects of like the day-to-day running of the governance, whereas it's more of a social political or like soft political change that we're seeing from all of our DEI departments.
Yes. So I wanted to share something really quickly, just because we're talking about because this was part of the opening ceremony as well. I'm gonna see if what this shows. Okay, so it doesn't show exactly it, and I'm not gonna show it because I do think it's disrespectful to the dead.
Right.
As long as this doesn't all of a sudden, what are you doing? Let's see. Okay.
Autoplay. Everything.
No, I hate autoplay. I don't care about. Well, actually, I do care about data privacy because that's my job. So basically, I'm okay. Well, whatever. They screwed up the whole thing, but basically, what it was an image. Let's see if I can go back. Apparently, I can't. They've got me trapped. So let me see. Let me see. Okay. Well, all right. So I'm not going to show
find
you
your search.
what part of the opening ceremonies it was, but it was something where it did show the decapitated head of Marie Antoinette. And that's very, very, very sad for a variety of reasons, because I mean, like, there's a bunch of propaganda that goes against her, and by all validated accounts, she seems to have been a very practicing, like a very faithful wife and a practicing Catholic. And so the fact that she is treated the way she is treated is really repulsive, because like she seemed like, I think my wife put it this way, like put a really good job with this, where it was like she was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and then she got killed. And so the idea of like, I don't understand like the French representing her the way she is outside of that one what is it, that one quote where
let them eat cake.
Yeah, which
she never said that.
Right, like people can't even find where she said that. And so
because she didn't. It was anti-royal propaganda from her enemies.
Well, right. And so she's in this state, like this happens. So like, and this to me is like very big. This is what for me brought back the Enlightenment aspect, not just looking at the Last Supper mockery, but also this was because what happened after Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were killed. There was a dictatorship of quote unquote reason, right? Like where there was a new system in place. It was run by a bunch of opponents of the king, and they tried to promote like a super rational perspective, where it was very materialistic, and the only will that matters is the will of the people, and which is highly like suggestive, right? Like the will of the people quite literally be whatever you want, especially if you're doing a top-down approach, which they absolutely were. So like they because like there'd be villages that would be like sacked because they weren't following what the new order was.
Catholic villages of the Vendée that rose up in rebellion, because it's like, well, rebellion we say, but they were technically following their lawful ruler, the king.
Well, right. And so, and then you have like, just like the Last Supper, you have Notre Dame, which is then turned into a temple of reason. And in a very similar thing plays out what the what is it, the image that I forget what it starts with a B, I can't remember that name. They what they said the Last Supper was supposed to be like. It starts like
Botticelli.
Yeah. So like
Birth of Venus and all that. Or wait, no, that was someone else.
That's No, it's like basically Dionysus and the feast in the woods.
Oh, okay.
A bunch of women, like the image has a bunch of women, and the interesting thing about those women is that they're women that are mothers that left their husbands and children, and they're just going out in the wild.
Right.
They're just literally doing like crazy stuff, including orgies and like just crazy stuff.
Right.
And when you hear about the Temple of Reason, which that's Notre Dame, under like it was desecrated under the new dictators now of France, they did the same thing. And I mean, they did a whole bunch of grotesque things in Notre Dame that reflect what that painting was showing. And because the painting doesn't show that outright, like there's different ways of, there's artistic ways of showing such images
Well,
without
right. It's like it's implied to the readers
yeah.
who know, to the viewers who would know about like the Greek myths about Dionysius and his followers.
Well, right. And so there came like what was it? It was so like when you see like you just see this pattern now. Like this is like a fairly like coherent pattern with what has come from the French Revolution and Enlightenment thought is it goes back to paganism because and the reason why or at least from my understanding is this focus on science in a
Mhm.
way that goes beyond what science is meant to be. So it's a focus on materialism in a very direct here we'll just move this. It's the focus on like it's called scientism. Like Bishop
Right.
Barron calls it that, and it came from that movement right after they took over France, and it's just this ultra rational, like when I say rational, I don't mean reasonable.
Right.
Like I know that's a
We mean
synonym,
rationalistic.
right? Where it's like it has to be like it's basically materialistic. We have to
Mhm.
understand it in everything in the scope of basically materialism. It has to be scientifically backed. I mean, like in a very, I don't
Well,
want to
it
like.
might be more of an anti-supernaturalism because materialism can be interpreted differently by different people.
So that's true. Yeah, let's go. Yeah, I like
But
that.
yeah, it's like
That's
the focus is the main idea is ironclad laws of the world and no no overarching like moral instruction from a creator necessarily, something like that.
well, right, and it ends up devolving into again like practical paganism. Like we talk about
Mm-hmm.
practical atheism, right? As Catholics, like and Christians, we talk about practical atheism where you say you believe, but you don't actually do anything that separates you from like your atheistic peers.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this case, it's like it's practical paganism. They may use different wording, but all the actions that play out end up being the same. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me.
So, um, yeah. So, I mean, outside of that, yeah, outside of that, like it's a very what's crazy to me is like you'll have like words like conservative, like, and this is something I fairly like I recently learned where like conservative and liberal comes from an enlightenment mindset.
Mm.
And like prior to the Enlightenment, there wasn't a conservative or liberal. It was simply, um, uh, well, what is it? What was it? It was like traditional, and then oh, I can't remember what it was. Um, so wild
Mm.
how many Catholics are trying to convince themselves it was a Bach. All you have to do is like look at the image. Like
Mm.
when you look at,
I
I'm not going
mean,
to show that image, but
that's
like,
part of. I mean, whether the influence was there or not, it's like, I mean, even if it was a bacchanal in some sense, it was a bacchanal specifically designed to resemble the Last Supper, and therefore, whether it's a bacchanal or not, the blasphemy is still there.
well, right. I think it's a mixed image. I don't think it was just one
Right.
thing. Um, but yeah, like the Enlightenment being the way it is, and how it's taken over the West.
I mean,
It's
even
something
left and right as political terms come from the French Revolution.
exactly. And so now we're in a situation where we're trying to like, you have like the culture war aspect, and you're trying to fight the culture war, like be a practicing Catholic, live out your life, but also like make sure that you're not falling into entrapments.
Mm-hmm.
Like the when you play within the system, like for example, we're always going to lose, or it seems that way, where we're always going to get more progressive,
Mm.
right? Like progressive, because there's an inherent bias in the system to make it look like everything's always progressing. Within like prior to the Enlightenment, things still developed. Like even though prior to the Enlightenment they called it the Dark Ages, because you had the Dark Ages and then you had the Enlightenment, and the Enlightenment enlightened the dark. Like that was like the play, you know, historically.
Yeah.
And so
me and my friends, we prefer to call it the Endarkenment.
Well, right, and
I mean, because like when reason lost the light of faith, it became darkened.
Exactly. All right. I mean, that could be made into a T-shirt. Fight the Endarkenment. Okay. So, but the I guess like, what was it? There was still progress in like underneath the system of like Catholicism in the papal states.
Absolutely.
Like that's how we ended up getting the scientific method, and like even to the point where there was a preference between scientism and non-scientism, or the supernatural. And so like, because by definition you can't evaluate supernatural claims conclusively from science because of like science's limitation to only look at the natural world. So like that's just a built-in assumption. And that assumption was there prior to the Enlightenment, so it's not like it's reactionary. And so
modern science does owe a lot to the church.
Yeah.
I mean, people will also hold up the Renaissance as a time of like amazing progress, but the time period that typically gets given the name of Renaissance, I mean, if you look at the actual history, there really wasn't any progress in science, mathematics, literature, or a bunch of things. It was all much more stagnant. It's like the one very notable thing from that period is the painting. And don't get me wrong, the Renaissance painters were amazing. But because the Renaissance painters were very good at painting, and you can look at painting and see, wow, this is amazing, it doesn't take specialist knowledge to look into and evaluate why it's good so much as the other things. And also because Lorenzo de' Medici was a brilliant politician, people assume that like the people that he gathered around him must have also been like smart and innovators and all that. But really, when you look at like scientific things specifically, so the greatest periods of scientific development, I guess we'll say before the Protestant Reformation, were 1250 to 1350, which is like the end of the Middle Ages. And then around late 1400 to early 1500, when you had Copernicus and Galileo. I mean, Copernicus is perhaps the one major progress in science, like with his heliocentric theory. That's like the major sort of progress in science that you can point to that's in the time period we typically call Renaissance, and it was at the end of the period.
Well, right, and I think when it comes to like, there's something to be said to say that we move forward in, like, we don't have to move forward in science, right? Like that's not necessarily something. If you lose your humanity and you move forward in science, like that's not worth it. And so
I would agree.
The idea, because like it's not like that time period didn't have its own set of problems, right? And so like, so this idea of, and not all problems can be solved with science.
True.
So it's this idea of, well, moving the human person forward may include, okay, well, we're just going to make amazing pieces of art that reflect the human condition and point to the good that will prime, like from because we live linearly, right? Like that will prime a population to then be ready to take on the science and have the mind that they should to appreciate the science and not go like what the French did, which was off the rocker and like kill a whole bunch of people for no reason.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So like that's the, but but yeah, like, I mean, I just find it fascinating because they, when you talk to like new atheists, for example, new atheists sound, see, like, this is like the weird thing is, like, maybe I'm doing this wrong. Maybe I'm just like presupposing a whole bunch of things, but new atheists very much sound like what I would expect the French revolutionaries to sound like, where there's, all right, how can you prove this with science? Okay, but like, can you give me an argument that doesn't have like words in it, but like equations? Like, can we have like, do I have to think conceptually about this, or is it something that you can show me plainly? And like, because like that's what all those arguments kind of boil down to when it comes to like, you got to show me with scientific evidence. It's like, yeah, but philosophical evidence is just as good, and actually better, because it lays the groundwork for literally everything else. So like, when you're like, whenever I talk to atheists, or growing up talking to atheists, I don't talk to atheists as much anymore, but like,
understandable.
Yeah, I mean, like, why would I want to continue? Whatever. But it's this constant, like, show me the evidence, show me the evidence, show me the evidence. And then those same people are promoting, oh yeah, men can be women. And you're just like, show me the evidence. And then they can't, they give you pseudoscience. They don't give you scientific, like, actual science. They give you pseudoscience because they have it's all confirmation bias.
Well, right. So they're justifying something that they've already determined. I mean, that's kind of a thing you see, not just in that area, but it's very common for people to just to arrange their thoughts to justify their behaviors, or like they make a decision emotionally, and then they rationalize it.
Well, and
Ben Franklin is on record for saying that the best thing about human beings is that they can rationalize anything. I don't think that's the right way to take it, and I lost respect for him when I heard he'd said it.
Well, right, because you can rationalize nonsense.
Right. You can rationalize something that's wrong or bad.
Right. And so, like, when I was talking to my friends, that's exactly like when he was like promoting this idea of, this is just the Bacchanal. I hope I'm saying that.
Bacchanal.
Yeah. This one. So this, the last word, the party, and like, and making his arguments, I could see where he put the cart before the horse, and then he tried to fill in the gaps in his arguments as to why this is what it was. And it, like, he was appealing to, like, really, like, out of, like, he was grasping at straws, and it was like really frustrating because, like, it was someone who I respected. And all of a sudden he's saying this, and it's like, dude, like, this is a fairly obvious problem. And like, why are you doing this? Like, and it's just really weird. So, because, like, I know people are saying that on Twitter, like, oh, well, the gaslighting's happening on Twitter. It's weird when you have someone who you think, like, who you highly respect saying it, and they're giving you BS answers as a response to it. And you're not like, it's like, well, I'm trying to figure out why you're saying that. And you're like not trying to explain it to me well. And it's like weird. But you're right. Like, cause we can, like, we're at a point where we are talking about the Olympics having drag queens on a family, like, what should be a family friendly show, like, ceremony. And we're saying that that's okay. And don't get me wrong, there was pushback. There's absolutely pushback. And that was good that pushback happened. But it's kind of almost like it's the last straw, right? Like, this is a series of things that have happened for over a decade now, where this type of societal grooming is happening, where we push these perversions in such a way and trying to explain, like we just explain them away, like, oh, we're gonna do something really edgy and it's gonna offend people, and then it's like, oh, well, actually it wasn't this thing, it was this other thing over here that nobody knows about, that just happens to exist in a very obscure way. Doesn't quite look like the thing, but because you're reading this article, you're not going to actually see the reference points. And so you're just going to trust what we're saying, as opposed to validating it yourself and seeing that they're just giving you a bunch of BS. Am I sound good? I'm not trying.
Yeah.
Like, so, I don't know. Besides that, like, do you have any other thoughts on? I know we could probably talk about a lot of this stuff in detail, but like, I'm also okay like doing that to a certain extent. But like, you know, do you have any other thoughts on the matter?
Not super important, although I could, you know, go into history, into a bunch of obscure more details, but I don't think going over those points would flesh out the broad strokes much more.
Okay. No, that's fine. So recently I ended up, so I wanted to say this, and this, you know, this is going to be at the end of the video. I mean, the recording, live stream, whatever. But it's, so I ended up contacting the USCCB because I wanted to evaluate something similar to what Brian Holdsworth evaluated in terms of the altar boys and altar girls situation. And so I have about 26 years of data, and I'm going to be doing a video talking about altar boys and altar girls and how much that influences the priests today. So like how many who get ordained, how many of them were altar boys and altar boys. They weren't altar girls, but how many of them were altar boys? And so I'm going to be going over that, and then I'm going to be going over the certain parameters that will probably be used to justify not going with the suggestion I have, because I'm going to have a very pointed suggestion, and the evidence I think is so strong. I'm actually going to be sending this to bishops, like personally. Like I'm going to do our bishop first, right? Like our archbishop, because he deserves that attention first. And if he wants to do anything with it, that's fine. But it's going to be something where it's going to be very direct, and not. I'm not really going to mince words that much. I am going to explain away a lot of reasons from a statistical perspective that I think a lot of people miss, or they don't give enough reason for. So I'm like, so basically you can't just say, well, what about this and that? And like, why isn't that taking place? It's like, no, I'm literally going to cover it. I'm going to cover it, and I'm going to explain why those are silly objections. And that's my next video. So I've been
looking forward to it.
Well, okay, thank you. So, but yeah, so okay, cool. All right, so that is it. I guess I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me, Dan. I thought it was fun, and like the deep dive in history that you did, I think was very important, because it all matters.
That it does. Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. All right. I will talk to you. Well, yeah, I will talk to you guys. Well, I'll talk to you guys later. Hopefully Dan will talk to you guys later some other time. So thanks for watching.